So welcome back. If you're sticking it out with me, today's Tuesday, and I'm wondering if you're at home, have you thought about how you surrender this area of money to God? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And today we're going to jump into Timothy. It's an incredible book. Actually, there's two, 1st and 2nd Timothy. It's written by a man named Paul. He's much older at this time, and he's writing to a much younger Timothy. So if you can imagine, it's almost like Grandpa is going to have this life talk with his grandson. And so when you read Timothy, you're going to discover it's loaded with encouragement and it's loaded with a bunch of practical things. It's a really, really great book to walk through. But Paul in this book talks to Timothy about leading and talking to people about money and being content. And we're going to jump into that today. And like yesterday, we're going to go through this line by line by line to fully understand what Paul might be saying. So I'm going to jump into 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 to 12. And then I'm going to go right to verse 17 and 19. And this is going to be in the New International Version. This is what Paul starts with. He says, godliness with contentment is great gain. Basically, he's telling Timothy, here's the deal, Timothy. If you can follow God and be content, you're doing great. You're thriving. It's a great way to live. However, you need to understand money and stuff, they don't ruin you. They're not going to wreck your life. But if you go through life and you have this internal itch that you can't make go away, you have this internal itch that says, I have to have bigger, better, more all the time to be happy. Paul's basically saying it's going to be a struggle for you to be content as you're trying to live out this godly life. And then he writes in verse 7, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. Obviously, this isn't deep teaching. Everybody knows what Paul is saying. Contentment is really found when you see money and possessions through the lens of eternity. What makes a person rich in this life doesn't make the person rich in the next life. And when you have this eternal perspective, you understand what really matters. So what makes a person rich or poor in this life doesn't make the person rich or poor in the next life. And when you see life through eternity, you realize, again, what's most important, what really matters. Verse 8, Paul says, but if you have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Now, this one, I want to pull Paul aside and say, Paul, we've got to have some coffee. You don't have a wife, you don't have kids, and you're not living in my neighborhood. And honestly, I'm not content with food and clothing. I want more. I want a 401k. I want life insurance. I want money for college, money for a new car, and maybe money for both. Like, Paul, seriously, content with food and clothing. Here's the deal about our lives. You and I live in a culture that is so good, they excel at making us feel like you never have enough, making you feel like you're falling behind. Everybody else is doing great. Everybody else is going on vacations. Everybody else is getting new stuff. You're falling behind. You don't have enough. And what it does is it creates this incredible discontentment within inside of ourselves. We're constantly reminded that we're just not enough. We need more, and we're falling behind. So Paul goes right into verse 9, because one of the things I want to ask Paul is like, dude, why can't I have more? What's wrong with having more? Well, he goes into verse 9 and it says this. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap into money, foolish, and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. Again, our culture wants you to believe you're falling behind while others are having a ton more fun. And so what's created? This incredible discontentment. And it just makes us think, I've got to go get more money because I got to go get more stuff. And and if we have to, we're okay going into debt because I gotta stay up. I gotta have this stuff. Everybody else is having this stuff. And again, it's the culture we live in. It's called marketing. The culture we live in, marketing, they are supremely great at making you feel like you're just not enough and you need more. And when we live this way, Paul is writing to Timothy and saying, hey, grandson, someone I care deeply about, understand you're opening yourself up to some very harmful things. Verse 10, it says this, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." This is that famous verse that you probably hear about the love of money, and it's really misunderstood. Money isn't wrong, and it's not evil. It's just a tool. But the love of money is when problems are introduced to your lives. Why? Because when you believe with more money comes more fun and more security, we're going to pursue it. And we're going to be willing to walk down this path that says, I'm even willing to commit any sin I need to commit to get more money. Now, if you just heard what I just said, you might think, Ken, that's a little over the top. Well, I want you to consider this. When you start going down the road of, I need more money for more happiness and more security, it does open you up to where you're willing to probably bend some character issues, do what you need to do, maybe not take a Sabbath, or, just kind of ignore some of those things because I gotta, right? And it never starts with bank robberies and murders. It never goes there. Like, you don't say, man, I need more money for more stuff, I'm gonna go rob a bank. So where does this journey start? The journey starts with, I don't have time for God. I'm not gonna surrender to God. I'm not really sure even how relevant he is, because I gotta go make more money, because when I make more money, then I'll have more stuff and I won't be falling behind. Verse 10, the second part of verse 10, Paul wrote, "Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." This means people believe, like I said before, more money will bring more happiness and security. They no longer believe walking with God is going to bring me more happiness and more security. So they leave church. They leave their faith. And if you see them years later at a coffee shop and you bring up God principles to them, they sneer at you. They're like, you're so uneducated. You're so simple. You just don't understand. I can love God on my own. Paul continues in verse 11. "But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness." Paul is telling Timothy, Grandpa is telling his grandson, you need to surrender to money. You need to make the mature adult decision to refocus and pursue something completely different. It's the only way that you're going to be able to deal with this kind of discontentment, the only way of dealing with this itch that you can't quite scratch that says bigger, better, more is better. The way you deal with discontentment isn't pursuing it. The way you deal with it is pursuing something differently altogether. That's why Paul says, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. And how many people in our culture, how many people are doing that? Verse 17, Paul says this, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share." Basically, Paul is saying, Timothy, here's the deal. You're young, and you're going to be leading people older than you. And so when you're leading them, make sure you tell them, put their hope in God. Everything they're looking for is found in God. Tell them, be generous. Tell them to do good works. Tell them to give. I know you're going to be insecure as a young man, but tell them this is what it means to lead a community of faith. Verse 19, Paul continues, "In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of a life that is truly life." And there it is. That's exactly what Jesus said yesterday on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6. Lay up treasures in heaven. This is how you surrender the area of money. I don't know why I just got excited, but this is it. This is how you surrender the area of money. How? First of all, I just want to point this out. It's very simple. It's very practical. And you're going to find that if there's greed inside your life, one of the things you're going to find is what I'm about to say and what Paul wrote, it can create a lot of enormous pain inside of you. And you might even be tempted at home to create this fantastic argument why what Jesus said and what Paul said just doesn't apply to you. We surrender by being generous. We surrender by giving. You get out your money and you put it into God things because that's where your heart follows. Why does being generous work? Well, do you remember what Jesus said yesterday? That whenever the doors of your heart are closed, inside your soul, it's kind of like a dark, dank cellar. It's selfishness, and you're not seeing things the way God sees things. The only way to shed light and refresh your soul is to open the door, allow the sunlight in. The only way to open up those doors is to be generous, to give. To close today, I want to ask you a couple questions that I want you to process. This whole money talk, where do you come out on this money talk? Is this disappointing you? Is this information you've heard before? It's not really something that you've really changed behaviors on. It's that annoying talk that pops up now and then. Is there something inside you as you're going through these videos that you're saying, just stop. I just don't want you to talk about this anymore. Are the things of God, like being generous and giving, are they disappointing to you? What do you think of Paul's letter to Timothy? Do you think that's good advice? What do you think about this idea of surrendering money and the way we surrender money to God? We're generous and we give. Do you kind of wish that we had a spiritual solution to it? You know, the way we surrender money to God, well, you pray, it's spiritual. You try to be a better person, it's spiritual. The whole idea that it's practical, is that disappointed you? The way you surrender money to God is you're generous and you give. It's so practical. What are you going to do right now about this? Are you going to do nothing, turn off the YouTube clip and just kind of go about your day? Or will you immediately act on something? Are you explaining to yourself why what Jesus said and what Paul said, for some reason, it just doesn't apply to your life? So Sunday's big point was, because of Jesus, God forgave us of our sins. Because of Jesus, God's preparing a way for us to get into heaven. And because of Jesus, it has nothing to do with our human effort. And if all that is true, don't you think it's odd that we would really be stressed today? The God of the universe, who can take care of the spiritual and in eternity, he can take care of you today. Monday's big point was there's an undeniable connection between the spiritual health condition of our hearts and how we view and deal with money. Tuesday, today, to surrender simply means I'm going to open the door to my heart. I'm going to let fresh air, sunlight come into my soul and refresh it. I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give. Tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little fun. We're going to talk about 8 facts about money. And the reason I reserved tomorrow for that is I think sometimes when we talk about money in church, people just think, oh, they just want us to be impoverished, right? And that's just not true at all. We need to be working. We need to be creating. And we just need to talk about some of these things. And so tomorrow, we're going to jump in to some 8 facts about money. I'll see you then.